Lesson 5 for 4th grade for data. We're going to talk about collecting, representing, and interpreting data today. I'm Bailey.
I'm Shanna. Welcome.
So here's your first task. You're going to pause the video and you're going to complete the task on your own or with a team and partner. I want you to consider what would student learning need to look like for students to be successful for each part of this task. So you have measured the lengths of 7 pencils in the class to the nearest eighth of an inch, and then students are asked to create a stem and leaf plot and a line plot to represent the data and determine the mode, median, and range of the data set. So when we're considering the progression with BEST and data, when students started in 3rd grade, they were measuring the length of objects to the nearest half or quarter inch. They were then using data to collect and represent numerical data with whole number values using tables, scaled pictographs, scaled bar graphs, or line plots. Students were then asked to interpret the whole number data by solving 1 to 2 step problems. As they move into 4th grade, they're going to continue to collect and represent data, but it's also going to include fractional values, and they're going to use tables, stem and leaf plots, or line plots.
Stem and leaf plots, that's new this year, right?
It is new. The next thing is also new. Students are going to be interpreting the numerical data by determining the mode, the median, or the range. Students will solve real-world problems involving numerical data, and as they move into 5th grade, they'll continue to collect and represent data, and this time it will include fractional and decimal values, and they'll also do line graphs. Students will then interpret numerical data by determining the mean, the mode, the median, or the range.
So mean's different for 5th grade.
Absolutely. So it's really critical that we lay the foundation for that in 4th grade. So as we talked about before, in 4th grade, students are going to be collecting and representing authentic numerical data, which is including those whole numbers and fraction values using the different representations you see on the screen. So it could be a table, it could be a line plot, or even a stem and leaf plot. Students will interpret the data sets represented by the things shown above by determining the median, the mode, and the range.
And then I'm seeing at the bottom too that it might be a real world problem that led them to using that information to solve.
Right, and they can use any of the 4 operations for those real world problems. So throughout this unit, students should be given multiple opportunities to collect authentic data and then display the data using an appropriate format. And the data can be collected through measurements like time or even length.
I think this is so important that they need to know that the numbers are actual numbers and they come from somewhere. It's actually collected and it's not just made up.
Right, this is a real world math concept. So time measurements should be to the nearest hundredths, and then the length of objects can be measured precisely up to the nearest 16th of an inch. So after students have collected the data, they then can start to represent the data either using a table, which will help create the line plot or the stem and leaf plot.
They need to see the importance of organizing that data to be able to use it.
So using the data collected, students should work to create an appropriate number line based on the values in their data set. Students should then use the number line and plot their data with an X for each data point.
Yeah, I like that they're making connections between a number line with fractions and the line plot. And they also need to spend time understanding what do the X's represent, what do the numbers represent. I need to understand all of that before I can answer real world problems about it.
Absolutely. A common misconception that students will have is that they won't understand what their number line is split into. So it's important to have conversations about how many spaces are between one whole to make sure students really understand what their number line shows. So as students continue to work through collecting data and representing data, they're going to start to create stem and leaf plots. This is a type of data graph that utilizes place value to display the data collected by size, either least to greatest or greatest to least. So this is an example of a stem and leaf plot. So the leaf represents the smallest part of a number, and the stem represents the other parts of the number.
So let me ask some clarifying questions because this is new to me. So if I look correctly in the first row where the stem says 0 and the leaf says 0 3/4, that means I have 0 whole numbers and I have 0 fractions. So that first one is 0. And then the second one is 3/4 because there's no whole number with it.
Right.
And then in the next row, I have 1 and 1/4. 1 and 2/4, and then another 1 and 2/4. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Students really have to understand how to decompose numbers to be able to make the stem and leaf plot. Students will also use this to help create the benchmarks for their number lines when they're creating the line plots. Once students can represent the data, they'll then start to interpret the data. So they are expected to solve the 1 to 2 step problems, but they're also expected to be able to determine the mode, the median, and the range of individual data sets. So the mode is shown here, and the mode is the value in the data set that is repeated the most. So for this data set, 12 is repeated 3 times, that would be our mode. The median is the middle of the data set. So for this, 18 is the number that's in the middle of my data points, and so that's my median.
And I could see if the numbers weren't in order, I probably have to do that first, put them in order from least to greatest, and then find the middle number.
Right, it connects what we were talking about with the organization of your sum and leaf plot and that line plot. Then for range, students are expected to find the difference between the greatest value and the smallest value.
So I have to order them again in order to find the greatest and the least value.
So as students work with interpreting data, they need to be given lots of opportunities to organize data sets, which can help them determine the mode, the median, and the range. To help students manipulate the data, they could put it on sticky notes. And so I have 5 sticky notes here with different data points on it. And the first thing I'm going to do is order it from least to greatest. Once I do that, I can then X out the outside values, and I'm left with that middle value or the median of my data set, which is 7.
I really like the idea of making it hands-on so they can kind of manipulate the data. And then also you want to think about you needed to have an odd number of data points so that I can actually find the median.
Right, and so this has 5, so it works out. So having the data organized can really help students determine the mode, which is a value that occurs the most within the data set. In this data set, 10 occurs twice, which is more than any of the other data values, so that's the mode. It's important that students are exposed to a lot of different data sets because data sets could have 0, 1, or more than one mode.
So I see on that left example in the table that there isn't a mode because there's not a number that occurs more than once.
Right, and then if you look in this one, there are actually 2 numbers that are considered the mode because they occur the most.
And I think something else to consider, the data can be displayed different ways. Like initially we have it on a post-it note, then we have it in a table or a list, and then we even have it in a line plot. You can determine the mode any different way that it's represented.
Absolutely. So students are also expected to find the range of a data set, which is the difference between the greatest and the least value. So in this one, we have a 10 minus 1. Our greatest value is 10. Least value is 1. We subtract that. Our range would be considered 9. Students may have a misconception by confusing the range with the number of data points.
I could see that misconception happening. So instead, in the bottom one with the line plot, I need to do 12 minus 2, which is 10 to find the range, but they may see that there's one dot above the least one and the greatest one and subtract 1 minus 1 instead.
Right, and we want to make sure they're finding the difference between the values and not just the number of points there are.
That goes back to knowing what do the numbers represent and what do the dots represent. So really just understanding what is a line plot.
So throughout this unit, students need to be exposed to the concrete thinking. That's measuring, using time, using the length. It could also be manipulating those sticky notes with the different data points. As students get confident with that concrete, they can shift to a representation, which could include the table, the sum and leaf plot, or even the line plot. As they continue to move through the mode, the median, and the range, they may start to have some more abstract thinking and thinking about explanations of what their math thinking was.
And even including those equations. But I think it's important to remember that we need to keep connecting it back to the table or the sum and leaf plot or the line plot and make sure that they're making connections between the different strategies and not just leaving one and moving to the next one.
Thanks so much for joining us for our Math Dive in 5 for 4th grade, talking about collecting, representing, and interpreting data. We hope you join us again.
See you next time.